Hey, we're live. It's 11 o'clock. It's been a couple weeks, maybe even a month or so since we've done one of these things, but we're back and we're going to try to keep a regular schedule. Hey, everybody, it's me. It's Saul, your friend from the internet. I assume you still remember who I am. Today on the show, hey, Saul Talks 101 with, wow, how do we get this guy? Ben Zifkin. Ben is the CEO of Hubba.com. Hubba is a one-stop shop for retailers to discover and order products from emerging brands. Ben, thank you for doing this.
No worries. Thank you for having me. This is great. It's nice to get back and hang out again.
Yes, this is the reason I wanted you on the show. Besides the fact that I admire you, you have a really interesting bunch of things to say. This is the closest you've ever welcomed me into your home, so this is exciting.
The shrine is in the other room from you, so yeah. It's just around the corner.
Cool. So before I got a bunch of things I want to talk to you about, but before we go into it, tell people what Hubba is and give a little bit more thoughtful explanation than my one line that I gave.
That one line is actually perfect. It really does encapsulate it. We are a platform that connects emerging brands and companies that need those brands. So to give you a basic idea, when I talk about emerging brands, it's the up and coming CPG companies like the really amazing, alternative like stevia flavored ketchup and the really great Next barbecue sauce, or heirloom popcorn. Like this really interesting company. And what we do is we take these brands that are no longer just hobbies in people's basements and they're starting to grow, and we help get them out into the world. And that's kind of our emerging brand, our supply side. On the other side of the equation is the companies that need these brands. And traditionally it's been independent retailers. So we focus on getting these really great grocery stores and really great gourmet stores and health and wellness stores, ones that really care about products, really care about how they curate their stores. And we matchmake them and allow those brands to get into these local communities.
So that's cool. So I assume you've heard, but the last 4 or 5 months, there's been a pandemic going on in the world. COVID-19. It's really sort of shaken things up. Some of the industries that were affected the most, obviously airline, hospitality, travel, and stuff like that. But retail is right up there at the top of the list. And retail obviously is where you live and in the world you live in. How can you give us sort of your view on how, besides the obvious stuff with closures and stuff like that, but how has retail really changed in the last 4 months?
Yeah, I think it's right across the board. It is a massive shift in a whole bunch of different ways. But there are some industries, when you talk about retail, it's such a broad category. There's online, offline. There's different categories of retail. And what we're seeing is obviously there's some areas of retail, the luxury world, for example, even like clothing and fashion in that world, that is taking really, really hard hits. And even within, fashion, some areas of fashion, the luxury side could be really difficult because, who's going out right now? And the other pieces like the athleisure world and like the more comfortable stuff is actually doing quite well. But in our world, which is more on the food and like CPG side of things, it's been a boon. Like this has been a pretty amazing time. We've seen just acceleration of adoption of technologies, of people changing business models. And that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And then there's a whole bunch of different scenarios in between when you start looking at things like, restaurants, which are technically retailers, and other areas of that spectrum. So it's right across the board, but people are rethinking everything now. And, it's the first time that I think there's been such a shakeup that everybody's been thinking about what does the future hold now and how can we do things that are a little bit different.
All right, so you mentioned luxury. You stole my thunder. I was going to save that for a little later. But luxury, I told you the story earlier. I've one of the things that I do when I get stressed out and things like that is I tend to look for homes online that I can't afford, and $500,000 cars and $100,000 watches. And I don't know, like if it's just me doom scrolling and making myself feel bad about myself that I can't afford these things, or it's just, it's to motivate me to be aspirational, and it's like, well, just, start working and you can buy this stuff. Get back to work. And I saw a sweater online the other day that was like $1,000. And I don't buy $1,000 sweaters. It's not my thing. I pretty much just wear t-shirts with my face on it. But I thought to myself, like, man, the luxury market has to be just dying, because luxury clothes is all about signaling and validation. Like, I wouldn't wear $1,000 sweater in my house. I wear $1,000 sweater to go out, so someone can say, "Oh shit, that guy's got $1,000 sweater."
Right.
So, like, does the luxury market survive? Like, I do think expensive cars survive. I do think, like, things like that, and the real estate market, at least personal, not commercial. I think that's going to be a boom, because people are stuck in their homes and they realize they need an extra room, or wouldn't it be great to have a bowling alley in their house because they don't go out anymore? But like, luxury fashion, like, what is that? Does it survive?
Yeah. I think you're looking at different stages here. So we talked about the last, 4 or 5 months, which has just been a complete, almost like an abyss. Like, people really don't know where to go and how we're going to come out of it. There's probably multiple stages here to think about. There's obviously, where are we now? And I think we're probably coming out of maybe we're at the end of the beginning phase of all of this stuff, where people are finally getting to like a routine a little bit. They're starting to see some normalization. It's definitely not back to normal, but their daily activities are a little bit normal, and they have a little bit more of a routine than they probably had in the first 4 or 5 months. And there's that world, which I think things, what we saw even in the CPG world, we also saw those phases where there's an immediate lockdown. People just don't know what's going on. People are frozen, and that's the general natural human tendency around all these things. But that was kind of that first stage. Then we have probably this next stage that we're about to get into, which is probably a little bit longer, the next couple of years or so, the next year, let's say 12 to 18 months of coming out of this piece of it. And you have to remember, we're not just dealing with COVID and a pandemic, you're dealing with massive economic factors too. And talking about potential recession or potential slowing of the economies, which we're seeing. And that has its own effects as well. So we have, 12 to 18 months of that, and how's retail gonna handle that? And you start talking about things like, the luxury world, like, where does that fit in during, that stage? And then the last piece of it is kind of coming out of that piece, which is, the new normal. And I obviously don't like using that phrase, but when you get into that world, you have to remember there's a lot of things that have changed over the last little while, but there's a ton of things that haven't changed. Like, people are still going to want nice things. Like, it is human nature for those pieces. People are still going to want that kind of that social aspect of it, whether it's online or whether it's in real life, but that connection with people. And again, you were talking about being able to show off your sweater. Like, you might not be able to go outside, but there's a lot of stuff on Instagram that you're seeing right now, or on TikTok or Hubba. Like, people still crave that type of behavior. So I do think that there's definitely this shift that we have right now that impacts this tremendously. But I think a lot more of like the longer term are the things that aren't going to change necessarily in this world. So if you are able to weather those next, 12 to 18 months, if you are a luxury brand, and you really have to get creative how you cope over that time. But there's a lot of things that aren't going to change after that I do think that they still obviously will survive, and there'll be new types and new models around that as well.
Okay, so weathering 12 to 18 months, there's a lot of brands that are sort of vanishing. I yesterday I read, so I don't smoke cigars very regularly, might have 1 or 2 a year, but I have like one brand that I like. So I'm very brand loyal with everything. You go in my closet, there's about 6 brands, and that's about it. And so the Nat Sherman Cigar Company, it's 42nd and 5th Avenue, New York City. They got a townhouse. It's been buying cigars there on and off for 10 years, but like, I'm not a big customer. It's whatever. But man, they went out of business, or they filed for bankruptcy yesterday. 92 years in business. Like, there's just a lot of companies that can't figure it out. So, I'm curious with you, someone who, is a brand matchmaker and someone who does work with retailers, does retail have to become, and again, you're going to go back to there's many different parts of retail, but, like, I'm rambling, but I'll get to it. Different bubbles are popping in my head. Seth Godin said a couple years ago that marketing or the music business has to become the souvenir business, because the only place you really make money now is t-shirts and tickets. So everything, has to be around that. Does retail have to become like a spectacle now, like for people to part with their money? Like, it can't just be that online transaction, because it's not satisfying. Like, I'm not letting you speak, but I'll throw. This is the sign of a good interviewer. I ramble for 20 minutes and feel good about myself, and then I hand it back to you. But I'm answering my own question. I'm working through it, but it's like Amazon. I've bought 6 different things from Amazon recently because I bought a new laptop, and this is the first interview we've done that I've been hardwired to internet. So like I hope the image is perfect, but I bought a new laptop. When laptops, you buy all the adapters, you buy all the stuff. I feel guilty even working with Amazon or buying stuff from Amazon, because I go in and say, I want this brand, and they immediately try to sell me the Amazon copy. Yeah. And like, it seems like Amazon is the hope of all retail, but it's also the worst thing for retail, because if you've got a product that shows any glimmer of success, there's going to be an Amazon Basics version of it, and that's always going to result a higher search or whatever. So, like, I don't even remember the question anymore. What does retail have to do to survive? Because it just seems like Brooks Brothers, all these established brands who maybe were a little too bloated or whatever, but man, it's hard right now, and we do need retail for the fact that we need products, but we also need the jobs and stuff like that.
There's a lot to unpack there, but
I'll give you the next 20 minutes to do it. I'll stop talking.
The first part is does retail need to be a spectacle? I do think that there's obviously that element of it, but I don't think that it's one or the other. I think what retail is doing, it's kind of harmonizing across all different types of mediums. There is the ones that have to be experiential, obviously, like people have to change, and some of these businesses do have to change. But what you're talking about is there's actually different layers of this. So there's the very commodity focused types of things, which are pretty easy to do online. It doesn't matter if it's, buying an adapter here, it doesn't make a difference, on the specific brand or the material potentially, or the ingredients potentially. It's just a very basic commoditized thing. That suits very well on the online world, and that's great. But there's a huge section of the economy that's not that, and those will always require some type of. I keep on going back to the human piece of it, right? There's more than just a button click on some of those things. So how you accommodate that, you can do some of it online, you can do some of it in store, you can do some of it through influencers, you can do some of it through different versions of it, but it does require some type of personal connection. So I do think the best retailers will be a lot more experiential moving forward, for sure. I always go back to the types of brands and retailers that we deal with. So we're wholeheartedly focused on helping independent retailers. So this is the local grocer, the local, food store, health and wellness store. Generally, 10 stores or less. Most have 5 stores or less, and most of them are just 1 or 2 stores. Actually, the ones that are run by the owners, they really care. They're competing with Amazon and Walmart and all of those folks for the most part. So I can't believe you posted that. And it was more than once, I thought, but. But when you're starting to deal with all of these folks, they all have kind of different needs on what experiences, like the experiences. And what I always talk about with our independent retailers is your job, and the thing that's going to separate you from Walmart or from Amazon is is your in-store experience, for example, because these are real-world brick-and-mortar retailers. The number one thing that people can do to create a better experience for their customers is to have the products that their customers care about and to get really good at picking and choosing those types of things. It's not about the cool little virtual wall that they might have, or this little really interesting technology, or like, some type of like gimmick. It's just about having the right products for your customers as the basic table stakes of all of that. And you start talking about the music industry a little bit. And historically, we're in this world where, everything needs to go through like Sony distribution, or had to go through like the big record companies, and you had to play that game, and there were gatekeepers the entire time. So they're the ones who got the big tours. What we saw, obviously, with the internet, with YouTube and with like SoundCloud and with all of these different, like, those gatekeepers went away a little bit, especially with file streaming services and sharing. Like, totally new models popped up, and we're starting to see that more and more so in retail, that these emerging brands can get out to the world without being beholden to a massive Walmart purchase order, without being beholden to huge distributors that take massive chunks and having so many, middle people from the brand to the retail to the consumer side of things. So going back to your Amazon and Walmart, portion of it, what we're starting to see was when these brands started to come about, we saw this massive like proliferation of kind of these emerging craft brands. It's cheaper to create a brand. It's easier. You can co-manufacture things. It's easier to build an audience right now. And we started to see this explosion over the last 5 years or so. And historically, for a brand, it used to be the number one thing that I cared about was getting my Walmart purchase order for like thousands and thousands of products. The next one was I need to get all my stuff onto Amazon. And then we started looking at kind of the long tail of this. Maybe I need my own pop-up shop. Maybe I need my own distribution to my local communities. That's now flipped because of this. We're looking at all these emerging brands, and they care so much about their brand. They care so much about the community that they're building. They care so much about the audience that they don't want to get lost necessarily in Walmart right now. They definitely don't want to get onto Amazon because they are worried about the dilution of brand, and also, hey, and I don't know if it's true. Like, there's definitely fear, uncertainty, and doubt around whether Amazon's going to copy you or not. But like, there is something about it. And there is also like, I don't want to pay millions of dollars to Amazon to just get found on their search engine. So they are really focused. And there is this massive, massive trend coming back to Main Street, to independent, to local. And I think that's a really big, big change. And that's going to be, to me, one of the longer lasting effects of COVID over the next little while, which is how do we get a little bit, maybe how the pendulum swings a little bit back from the big box stores back to Main Street.
So we have a question from Dara Sayed Frank, who's one of my dearest friends in the whole world, and you've met Dara in New York. So Dara just launched a really, really amazing company called Playhouse, and she was a guest on the show. And so Dara's and her partner, work partner, are two of the best, experiential marketing people in the world. They've built, activations for Netflix and all sorts of different, brands. And when COVID hit, they sort of took their skill set and started making indoor activations for kids. So they would do room takeovers and build an entire entire treehouse inside of your backyard or bedroom, backyard, and basements and stuff like that. Really, really cool stuff. And you guys should, definitely check them out. But as a new brand, how do you get the word out? How do you get people to get excited about a product that, they probably want, but don't know exists? And that sort of plays right into, your expertise.
Yeah. It does in some cases, and in some cases not. So like, even though we do a lot of stuff online, I definitely wouldn't call myself an e-commerce expert, but we do have this really amazing, like, panoramic view of the market. And to me, we all, again, keep on separating e-commerce from real world, but it really is just commerce. Like, we just need to get to a point where you're a brand, you have something, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, and it needs to get to the audience that you care about. And if you think about it at a really high level, whether you're online or whether you're in the real world, even a retailer is just an aggregation of an audience, right? Of people who are going to buy your stuff potentially. your e-commerce sites, whether you're on Facebook or Instagram, where they have your own Shopify site, whatever it is, you're aggregating an audience. Like that's what that layer is at the most fundamental level. It's almost like a marketing aggregator, whether you're a retailer or whether you're an e-commerce site. So the issue is, if I have a brand, my big problem is I need to get my product to the people that are going to care about my product. And I almost have two ways of going about that in today's world. One is, and you kind of mentioned more of the activations, which is more of the services side. But if I just use it as like a product, I can go knock on doors. I can go into retailers, for example, and try and sell my product, or I can go set up, a Shopify site and have an online presence. They're both interesting. What we're trying to figure out is, and this is maybe where Hubba comes in for specific brands, and I would think about the market as a whole this way, is you have two options. You can either go online to e-commerce and basically create your audience from scratch. You need to be able to go differentiate yourself. You need to be able to market to the people that are going to care about it. You need to go check out Facebook ads. And that is actually a really important and critical part of your business, but it's only one part of your business. The other part that we should start thinking about is those audiences already exist somewhere in the real world. They could exist in gyms. They could exist around, if you're doing stuff, for kids around schools or around, hockey arenas or baseball fields. Like those audiences and those people already exist. So if I'm a brand today, I'm thinking about two things. How can I reach those people online and create and build my own audience from scratch? And the other one is, how can I go and find where those audiences already exist in the real world and get my product directly to them? So it's a really hard time to be able to differentiate, because you have so many brands today, and you have like just such an easy way to go market and basically put more dollars online to try and build that brand. It's a lot harder. So the long way of saying is, figure out who your community is, figure out who your tribe is, be able to do valuable things for them, whether it's for your product or the content that you create around that. And then either go build it online, obviously from an e-commerce perspective. I really focus from a Hubba perspective of trying to figure out where those people are in the real world and get your product in front of them in the real world. So that's kind of the two sides of the equation. That's one of the things that we've been focused on a lot now is not necessarily just specific grocers and retailers, which is one area where those people exist for our types of brands. But there's so many other places. If you care about healthy eating, you care about keto, you care about, other types of specific diets, there are other places outside of the retailer where those people actually congregate and exist.
Isn't there a weird irony that e-commerce is going crazy? People are shopping online, as their default now, and behaviors that were set are probably, stay going forward. Yet, if you don't pay the $40, $50, $60 to get it shipped by UPS, your stuff could take, it's like, hey, this is the best and easiest way to get something, but it's going to take 45 days to get you because there's nobody working in the post office and stuff like that. Like there's this weird irony of the whole thing that
we see it all the time. We're in the situation, we're a technology company. We use technology to do the matchmaking, manage the transactions, and our whole focus is to reduce the friction of all the different obstacles that happen for a brand to try and get their product onto a store shelf or onto a shelf somewhere. And we can reduce that friction to almost nothing, to almost like the point that it almost materializes. But at the end of the day, there's a big part where I say, no matter what we do from a technology perspective, no matter what like advanced like modeling tools we have, none of this matters, because at some point you still have to get your thing from here to here. And that is always going to be a bottleneck. There are a lot of really interesting things that we're focused on now to change that model around in terms of, local distribution. We could talk about that. You saw, Instacart's doing some interesting things around like ghost distributors, and then DoorDash. So DoorDash Dashmart yesterday. So there's or a couple of days ago, there's a couple of interesting things that you can do, but you're right, you're always beholden to this supply chain side of things, and we actually see that also when I look at where we're betting on the future. I said a lot of things are going to stay similar, but some things are going to change, and I do think that there's going to be a greater emphasis on local supply chains, so less reliance on kind of getting products over from China or from people that you can't necessarily bank on. We saw that, especially in the food world, right away, when there was a massive amount of panic buying, like there was a lot of stress on the supply chain. It actually performed much better than I think most people expected, but it really made people very, very nervous on that side. And I think actually one of the biggest victims of that were the small businesses, the emerging brands, and the independent retailers, because every distributor and everybody getting product in was focused on their biggest accounts, and they left all the small guys to the wayside, which to me was relatively criminal. But do you think that that focus on supply chain is going to be more and more important, specifically local, more local, or at least continental supply chains? And the other one is people holding more inventory. We got to this world of really quick, just-in-time inventory, which is what you were talking about. Like you do your order, but you start to see that drain pretty quickly. It's going to be more expensive, but I do think people will place a premium. Businesses and consumers will place a premium on people holding more stock and just knowing that it will be there. And so I start to see that as a bigger trend a little bit later. So that supply chain world is going to be, I wouldn't say dramatically changed, but it definitely evolved several years faster than probably expected.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I've noticed, in the last few years is people don't give attribution as much as they used to. So I always try to give attribution whenever possible, but I could get this wrong. Michelle Romano from Clearbank and Dragon's Den, I saw her say it first. I don't know if it was her idea, but I'm going to just, give her the shout out that, I got this from her, but she said that COVID accelerated e-commerce 10 years in 1 month. Again, I don't know if it's her idea, whatever, but she had a graph and it looked legitimate. Do you think COVID actually accelerated e-commerce, or was it just time? Because, like e-commerce has been around for 15 years, or even longer. It's just, yes, we were forced into this thing where we sort of had to use it, but like, I also think a little bit of it was just timing.
Yeah.
But maybe the timing is the same.
Yeah, there's a few things. So, going back to that point, so that was a really interesting graph. I actually had a lot of, it was a really good point, but I actually had issues with the graph specifically. Because there are questions, right? Like going back to your point, did it accelerate things, or was it just like super suppressed for so long and all of a sudden this was the triggering factor? But more importantly, it talks about 35% of commerce being online, literally growing, significantly in 10 years. There's a lot of things to unpack in there, specifically on the e-commerce side. And when we start looking at, I obviously I'm a pretty big fan of real world commerce. In my world of CPG, for example, 5% maybe of commerce is online direct to consumer, right? You have an awesome oat milk. It's cool. People can come to your site and order the oat milk, but chances are you're not doing that to 50 different places. Ours is still pretty, consolidated on grocers and places like that, where you actually go and do your full shop as opposed to getting brand by brand. So in my world, the CPG world, 95% of that commerce is real world commerce, right? So even if that grows significantly, it's amazing how much emphasis we're placing on the e-commerce side, which is far and away the fastest growing, far and away is going to be, the most important piece of it. But even if you take that 35% across all categories, 65% of commerce is done in real world. So like A, that's a big deal. And B is, how on earth do you find that now? Especially nowadays, right? So I'm on my phone, I see something I like, I walk into the store, the transaction happens in the store. Is that online or is that in the store? If I decide to see something in the store and I decide to buy it on my phone, is that, real world or is that e-com? Like we keep on separating these things and they're not separate in my brain anymore. Like I don't understand how we're defining these types of things. So I'm trying to figure that world out. So I do think that was a little bit misleading. I do think that there is obviously a COVID bump. I don't think it will grow significant. Like if I had to plot that graph, if you look at it, kind of goes like this and then goes up significantly over the last quarter or so. It was I think a U.S. Department of Commerce graph that McKinsey repurposed a little bit. If you start looking at that graph, what does it look like over the next 6 months and then 12 months after that and then 3 years after that? I definitely think there's a spike. We're at home. Like we aren't out in the world as much as we are right now. That is definitely going to push it a little bit. It's at, let's say, 35% right now, if that's the case, based off of these definitions. I do think that will plateau for a little bit. And I actually do think it will drop once stores start to open and once we start getting into that second phase I started talking about. That being said, it took 10 years, to grow that 10% or whatever it was. It may only take 3 or 4 years after that, but it's not going to get to that level again, I think, for another 4 or 5 years once we start getting to that next level. So I don't know what the point was, but my point in general is e-com is a really important piece of this. Real world is also an extremely important piece of this that we can't keep our eye off of. And how you define the two, by the time you start looking at how you plot that graph, that definition between the two just gets so melded that graph is relatively pointless moving forward in my mind.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a craft brand, and I sell whatever whatever product. Let's say I'm Dara, and I sell climbing tools to put in your house and stuff like that. But well, using Dare's example, but let's pretend we've been in business for 10 years and built quite a substantial company, or not substantial, but like a real company. Do brands like that, should they be focusing on retention right now or net new? Because I think that almost like one of the conversations I've had with people from a marketing standpoint is the rules don't apply anymore. There are no best practices right now, so all these people coming and trying to sell you off the off the shelf solutions, it might work or it might not work, but a complete reimagination of process has to be done, because like the world is different. So where does a craft brand focus on right now? Is it stay with the people who love you, or is it go out and try to find 1,000 new people and maybe churn 90% of them?
Yeah. Listen, I wish I had the answer to that one. I struggle with this one. I struggle with this one all the time. I don't know. I don't know if you play poker. Are you a poker guy?
Not hardcore, but like play it once in a while. Like my 2 cigars a year is play poker twice a year or something.
That's awesome. So if you ever play like tournaments, or even with like friends or charity stuff, there's always like that first 5-10 hands where it's just a shootout, right? Everybody's got their adrenaline going, and people are pushing all in really quickly. I was never that guy. I was always kind of like the long-term guy. That being said, fortunes are made within that first, 5. Sometimes you get knocked out, and sometimes you make a huge stack at that stage. And that's kind of where we are here with like the world of commerce. When you're dealing with brands, there are lots of things moving now. Do you go hard and try and take advantage of some of this stuff and be super opportunistic, or do you look long-term on some of these things? So I am generally, even though I gave that poker example, generally in our world at Hubba, even I look at this in the world of retail and just say, you know what, when everybody else is kind of hunkering down, now's our time to play offense versus playing defense. So maybe a little bit contrary to what I was just talking about. From a brand perspective, I do think, listen, if you know that you can weather, you should have your really great group of existing consumers, like customers that love you. You've created this brand. Like that is the key thing right now, specifically in the product and brand world right now, is you really need to create this audience, where before it was really about mass, now it's really about kind of niche audience who really care about your product. Do you have to cultivate? Should you just focus on cultivating, or should you just focus on growing the audience? Yes, to both, and it's a hard thing to do. In terms of cultivating the existing ones, I think it's really important, especially in this day and age, that you don't change your personality. You're still as authentic as you were. That if you really cater towards this type of group, or this type of diet, or this type of lifestyle, or you don't start jumping into other things because the opportunity is there. But that being said, there are opportunities out there. So I think it's this is my way of giving a non-answer, is it's going to be different for everybody. There are opportunities there. But me personally, when I look at it, it is maybe the cautious opportunistic. So most of my focus is on being authentic, playing the long-term game, knowing that this world is going to come out, and but there's a piece of me that says there is some movement available and some market share and some audience available to catch right now. Let's go after that opportunistically without blowing our brains out that way.
All right. So we work together. It's probably been 2 or 3 years now. I'm bad with timelines. So obviously I know a little bit about Hubba, but the company has changed like night and day. It's a very different company. All companies, if they haven't changed over a 3-year period, would probably be in trouble. I want to ask you a marketing question, but I want you to answer as just someone who pays attention to marketing. I'm not asking you about Hubba or anything, so don't internalize this question. It's a generalized question. But so one of the questions that or one of the conversations I've had recently a lot is around growth hacking, and sort of doing those whether they be gray area or just cutting some corners to build an audience. And I've really become sort of very anti-growth hacking in the last sort of year or so, because I feel that people who carry the growth hacking job title aren't they're ignoring the foundations of marketing. And I think if you're building any great company, you need to do the foundational stuff and then layer the extras on top of that. So you build the foundation, then you add sort of, if you want to take some shortcuts and things like that, absolutely. You want to take some risks or experiments, absolutely. But man, a lot of conversation I've had recently is even with possible client work, everyone just wants like that sizzle, that growth hack thing. And I've actually turned down projects because I've said, like, I'm not who you want. Like, I'm a real marketer who understands growth hacking and will add it onto it. But if you just sort of do that stuff. So again, not asking about you relative to your business, but just as someone who pays a lot of attention to this, where are your thoughts around growth hacking?
Yeah. I think the definition's a strange one, and I'm happy to share, like, obviously the experience that we've had with Hubba on this. I'm very much a growth guy. Like, I love fast growth. Like, we built Hubba to be a high-paced, high-growth company, and actually our approach, especially as a lot of it was get as many people as we can onto the platform, get some critical mass here. If there's enough people, there will be some interaction, some collisions that happen, and the marketplace can start to grow. I have to say, like, that isn't necessarily the best approach for us. Like, there are different phases of a company. The first phase, it was, we're in obscurity right now. Like, nobody knows about us. So, like, let's get out there. Like, let people understand about us. We don't necessarily have the right business yet. We don't necessarily know the model yet, but like, let's not be in the shadows. Like, let's be front and center. And what that's going to do, it's going to help us, attract new people, get some new ideas, bring on some great employees, like start to bring on some investment, and like start to get that first piece. And I think that's a natural stage for some folks. As you know, like, we've been relatively quiet for like the last 2 years. And the reason is kind of had that stage, but then we need to build a business under it. And going back to your point about fundamentals, right? You can jam as many people in the top of the funnel as you can, but nobody's getting the value of that business. You're not a business, right? Like, you're literally a marketing engine for the most part. And not only is it not going to be valuable for people, it's going to be terrible if people start coming in like you don't fulfill the promise that you made to them, and it's not the reason why they're there. So we really spent a lot of time, and credit to my team who put me on a leash a little bit, because all I want to do is just see like top line numbers. Let's get going. And they almost went the exact opposite way and said, we're going to hand stitch this thing piece by piece by piece. And it's not a benefit. It's not a luxury most people have. Luckily, we brought on some investment because we were good in that first part, and we saw some of the initial growth. So we had a little bit of time to do this, and not everybody does. So you get forced to kind of do this. Let's just jam people inside of things. But we had that time, and we're starting to reap the rewards now, because when you start looking at competitors or other different types of marketplaces that are out there, they spend a lot of time filling that top of the funnel, and that's now dried up. Or the channels have changed, or their cost structure has changed on that, where we just keep on compounding month after month after month, which is way less sexy, way harder to do. Kills me sometimes because you really have to have patience, and you never know, am I just at that inflection point, or are we just going linear and I just need to cut it and start going back to the other way? So that was a really hard piece, but now you're starting to see the benefits of it. So I'm a big fan of what you're talking about, which is like, need to get down to fundamentals. It's not all about, you talk about growth hacking as a terrible thing. There are lots of great ways that you can amplify that through really great techniques or tactics or, technologies. And I'm all for that. But the growth for the sake of growth and, the ability to hit the top of the funnel without focusing on the bottom of the funnel and the value that you're giving, and the notion of driving that so that you can go raise money, I think all of that world has completely changed, and it will change for the next, several while. There's so much money out there, unfortunately, now. Like there's a lot of dry powder for VC funds, private equity funds, family offices to put to work. The issue is that they're going to start focusing a little bit more on those fundamentals, which is going to really change the way that people focus on kind of that growth hacking world.
Cool. Okay, I got 2 more questions, then I'm going to give you your day back.
Yeah.
You wrote a book a couple years ago about craft brands,
Mm-hmm.
and in the book you sort of called out, I don't remember how many, 2 dozen brands that you really admired at that time. Fast forward 2 years, what are some of the craft brands that you have your eye on right now that you admire?
Yeah, I looked at a whole bunch of different categories for that book, and what I've started to do is really going back to my last point about focusing and building that thing bit by bit, really looking at specific categories that can grow and compound. So I really cared a lot about the CPG world, primarily food and beverage, getting into some personal care and kind of spanning out. So I look at a lot of these folks, and the answer is there's a lot that you haven't heard of yet, and that's the beauty of it, is because we're finding them earlier and earlier and earlier. The ones that I really care about are kind of fit on a few things. One is, I didn't expect, when I created Hubba, it was for big retailers and big brands, right? Our first was Walmart's and the Unilevers and the Johnson & Johnsons. I really wanted to create a big, impactful business. I would love to say that my focus was on like emerging brands and helping out the small guys and dealing with independent retailers, but it wasn't. But I have to say, like, what an amazing way to wake up every day now, focusing on those folks and helping those people get better and survive. And, you get a brand from, 20 stores into 200 stores, you could change their life. But if you do that for 100,000 brands, you can move economic needles of entire countries. So like, that's a really amazing way to do it. The brands that I admire in that world are the ones that are looking at the world and trying to do better things. So at Hubba, we always focus on better brands, so bringing better products out to the world. And that could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be healthy. Like, you get a chocolate, but like, there's better chocolates. So chocolates that are farmed better, chocolates that have better ingredients, chocolates that have better supply chains and like more ethical, chocolates that like pay their workers better, and like companies that pay their workers better. So those are the types of things that I care about. And I think what we get to see now is, you talk about things that are going to change and aren't going to change in the future. What we've learned is that consumer behavior today, where historically when times were tough, they started going back to the usuals, like in the food world, you start going back to Unilevers and the General Mills and those types of folks of the world. What we're seeing now is like people's interests, specifically consumers today, their diets, their choices, their preferences, their types of, it's non-negotiable. This is their thing, and they will pay a premium to have the things that they want to have. And it doesn't actually go back. And all of our data is showing that, which was a hypothesis that we had, but is actually true. So moving forward, it's amazing that we have this culmination of consumers that care more about things, brands that have the tools, the mechanism, and the infrastructure to create products that are better products now. And now we start to pull them together. So the brands that I care most about are the ones that, take really a lot of pride in what they do. I'll give you an example. There's a company that we've been working with called Regrained, right? And an amazing guy named Daniel, he was the founder of this company, and he basically would work with craft beers and then realized all of the waste that happened from like the hops and all the grains that they use. And Daniel started taking all of that would end up in landfill or otherwise, it's unused, product, after they took all the sugars out, and he creates a flour out of it and actually creates his own products. So puffs and things like that. Also has flour for like pizza dough. So he's upcycling all this wonderful product. Same thing with a company called Renew a Mill. Like, there's an entire upcycling world. It is not just a really great thing, it's actually a really great product. So like hands down, it's actually tastes really good. It's well priced, is branded really well. And guess what? It also keeps all of this out of like the food waste like ecosystem. Amazing. So those are the types of brands that I care a lot about. And at the end of the day, you can have a really great story, but unless your product is good, unless it will actually sell to customers, it doesn't really matter all this other stuff that you do. But it's amazing. Like the ones that I admire most are the ones that kind of meld these two with a really great product, really great brand, but do really great things, whether it's a great ingredient, great technology, great like social cause, and things like that.
Very cool. Okay, last question.
Sure.
Where do you see retail going? Like, what does retail look like in 6 months, 12 months? This is your chance to make a bold statement that nobody will fact check.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I've always, again, even pre-COVID, like this is what I get to do is I get to spend my day thinking about how, and we talk about retail, but we think about commerce in general. So, and I kind of interchange the two. Retail is kind of the amalgamation of an audience. So your customers that go into a store for the most part. And with COVID, all I do is I basically sit here in like this chair and stew in my own thoughts about like where retail is going to go, which has been a wonderful and terrible thing as well. But the area where we're focused quite a bit on is, again, if our goal is to get products into the hands of consumers that actually care about it, we look at what are the best channels at doing that. And traditionally, we've been focused on this world of traditional retail. So I think yes, I did, Wendy. Thank you. I think the best place to focus for our future is in this world of alternative retail. So the biggest change that I see, especially in the food world, is retail moving. Retail has always been synonymous with stores, and I think in the real world that is going to dramatically change. So I think retail is going to move out of stores. What I mean by that is I think there's an entire world of alternative commerce that can get enabled, which is what we're focused on a lot right now at Hubba. So if you're a food company and you have this really great energy bar, right? You want to get your product into the hands of consumers that care about it. I could put you to where your audience already exists. These health conscious, wonderful people. They exist in local communities, and we can get you into independent retailers, no problem. But then there's an entire, spectrum. I can get you into, if you're a restaurant who are hurting today, I can sit there and say, guys, you sell amazing, tofu burger and salad, and people are going to order that on DoorDash. You should be able to include energy bars and, alternative, sweetened ketchup and those types of things as well. I can start moving you into, gyms and rock climbing studios. I can start getting you into, yoga studios and spas. I can get you into co-working spaces and Airbnbs and student residences, and just across the board, it's going to be less about how do I get you into a store so that consumers go in and purchase it, and say, I'm just going to take your product and help get you into where your customers already exist. So I think that world of alternative commerce is going to be huge. I think you're going to add this grocery pantry food layer to a whole bunch of businesses across the world. And I think it's going to be a lot more local than dealing with your big box store moving forward.
Cool. So you introduced yourself at the beginning. I always tell people to introduce themselves at the end. Tell people who you are, what you do, how they can get in touch with you, how they can, work with Hubba if it's a good fit. This is your time to share everything about you.
Yeah, everything about me. That's exactly it's an amazing topic. I'm not a huge fan of chatting about all the time, but I am a big fan of helping brands, especially CPG brands, get into retailers and this whole world of alternative retail to help them grow their business. Anything that we can do to help arm the little guy, to help them grow, and especially on the retail side of things, to help all these businesses that need help right now, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a local grocer. So that is my passion now, which like I said, I would have loved to say that that's the reason why I started Hubba, but it's such an amazing byproduct that I wasn't expecting. So that's what our focus is. So if you are one of those amazing brands, especially if you're a retailer, if you're somebody, and when I say retailer, I don't care what type of business you are. If you're a condo that wants to have, products, in your lobby, if you are a gym that wants to carry, great, food products that serve your customer base, any company that actually, if you're a restaurant, any company that could use additional types of things to enhance their business, bring people back more, sell more things, we'd love to help you. And you could always find us on hubba.com, HUBBA.com, and yeah, that's us.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing this, Ben.
No wonder. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again.